Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be diving into the fight for racial justice after 1945. It's a period marked by, all these huge global movements, ones that really reshaped the world, honestly. And we'll be exploring, both the victories, the huge milestones achieved, but also the struggles that honestly, sadly, still continue even today. Imagine for a second, like a world where you couldn't, I don't know, go to the same school as your friends. Or even just like drink from the same water fountain, simply because of your skin color. I mean, that was a reality for like so many people before 1945.
Yeah. Before 1945, systems of racial injustice were just like everywhere, deeply entrenched across the globe, honestly. Like in the United States, you had Jim Crow laws. And, those laws basically relegated Black Americans to this like second-class citizenship, enforcing segregation, denying them like their basic rights. And then in South Africa, you had the apartheid system. It was brutal, systematically disenfranchised the Black African majority, controlled every single aspect of their lives. These policies were like designed to maintain power structures, ones that privileged certain racial groups, obviously, and while oppressing others.
What's fascinating to me is that 1945 seems to be this like turning point, a year when the tide really began to shift. So what caused this? What sparked these movements for change?
Well, 1945 marks a pivotal moment, not just chronologically, but in terms of like global consciousness, the horrors of World War II, particularly the genocide of European Jews,
Okay.
It exposed the devastating consequences of unchecked racial hatred. And this, coupled with the, emergence of the UN and its commitment to human rights, really created this like fertile ground for these movements demanding equality and justice.
Yeah, it's like the world was finally forced to like confront the ugliness of racial discrimination and finally say enough is enough. So let's zoom in on the United States for a minute. The civil rights movement, a movement often symbolized by, such iconic figures like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. But what were the deeper forces driving this movement?
The civil rights movement was like the culmination of decades of activism and resistance by Black Americans. It wasn't just about, symbolic acts or anything. It was about dismantling this entire system, a system of segregation that permeated American society. I mean, this meant challenging discriminatory laws in education, housing, voting, public accommodations even. The movement's goals were like huge, ambitious, far-reaching, really, aiming to achieve like full equality for Black Americans in all aspects of life.
And it's so important to remember that these weren't just like abstract legal battles or whatever. These were real people fighting for basic human dignity. Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat on a bus, that wasn't just some random act of defiance.
Right.
It was a carefully planned act of resistance, part of this larger strategy to challenge segregation on public transportation.
Yeah. Absolutely. The Montgomery bus boycott,
Yeah.
the one sparked by Parks' arrest, that was this like powerful demonstration of collective action. It lasted, think about this, over a year, crippling the city's entire bus system.
Right.
And it drew national attention to the injustice of segregation. This victory, it proved that organized resistance could bring about, tangible change.
For sure. And speaking of organized resistance, Martin Luther King Jr. emerges as this key figure,
Right.
advocating for nonviolent resistance as this like powerful tool for social change. And his message, I mean, it resonated far beyond just the Black community. It inspired people of all backgrounds to join the fight for equality.
Oh, totally. King's leadership was so instrumental in shaping the civil rights movement. He understood that achieving lasting change required more than just legal victories. It required a transformation of hearts and minds. And his message of nonviolence, love, and forgiveness, it challenged the very foundations of, racial prejudice, offering a vision of a society where people are judged by their character, not their skin color. So powerful. And while the civil rights movement was gaining all this momentum in the U.S., another battle against racial injustice was unfolding in South Africa, the fight against apartheid.
Apartheid was like a system that was designed to maintain white minority rule. And it did this through like this complex web of laws and practices, all discriminatory, obviously.
Yeah.
Black South Africans they denied basic rights, relegated to separate and unequal living conditions. They were subjected to constant surveillance and control. It was a system that like institutionalized racial segregation in every single aspect of life.
It's hard to even fathom, the level of control and just like dehumanization that the apartheid system imposed on Black South Africans. Yet in the midst of all this oppression, figures like Nelson Mandela emerged, leading the resistance with just this like unwavering determination. Mandela's commitment to ending apartheid is, I mean, it's truly remarkable. He spent 27 years in prison for his activism, becoming this global symbol of resistance. And his unwavering belief in a free and democratic South Africa. It inspired millions, both within the country and around the world. But, it's so crucial to recognize that the fight against apartheid was a collective effort.
Yeah, it wasn't just about one individual. It was a movement fueled by, countless ordinary people, people who risked their lives to challenge this oppressive system. And it gained significant momentum, like internationally.
Right.
People across the globe boycotting South African products, divesting from companies that were doing business there, and pressuring their governments to impose sanctions.
Absolutely. The anti-apartheid movement really highlights the power of international solidarity, the pressure from those boycotts and sanctions. I mean, it played a huge role in isolating the South African regime and forcing them to the negotiating table. It shows how these seemingly small actions, when, taken collectively, can have a ripple effect across the globe, influencing political and economic landscapes.
That global dimension of the fight for racial justice is, I mean, that's so interesting to me. So while the U.S. and South Africa were grappling with these very specific systems of racial oppression, there was this, wave of decolonization movements sweeping across Africa and Asia.
Right. The post-World War II era saw this huge surge in demands for independence from European colonial powers, and these decolonization movements were fueled by a desire for self-determination, a rejection of the inherent inequality in colonial rule. Some countries they achieved independence peacefully, while others endured long and bloody struggles. But the underlying message, though, it was clear: the time had come for people to govern themselves, free from colonial domination.
So were these decolonization movements directly linked to the fight against racial injustice in places like, the U.S. and South Africa?
Oh, for sure. While each movement, had its specific context and goals, they were all part of this larger global shift towards a more equitable world. They drew inspiration from each other, sharing strategies, tactics, even a common language of human rights and self-determination. And the newly formed UN, the United Nations, they played a crucial role too, providing a platform for formerly colonized nations to voice their demands for independence and recognition.
So we're seeing this fascinating convergence of movements, all pushing back against systems of oppression, demanding a more just and equitable world. It's a period of just immense change with lasting repercussions that we're still grappling with today.
Yeah, it's incredible to witness the global scale of these movements pushing for change. It feels like I don't know, like a domino effect, with each victory, sort of inspiring and fueling the next.
Yeah, definitely. These movements, I mean, they were deeply interconnected. They drew strength from each other's successes, sharing strategies, across continents. The civil rights movement, the dismantling of apartheid, and the wave of decolonization, they all contributed to this seismic shift in global power dynamics,
Yeah.
challenging the established hierarchies of the time.
But as we've been talking about, achieving legal equality is just one part of the battle. And even with these monumental victories, the fight for racial justice is far from over, sadly. Exactly. Deeply rooted systems of oppression don't simply vanish with the stroke of a pen. We see this in the United States, where racial disparities persist in various areas of life, including the criminal justice system.
Right, that's a good point. We often hear about systemic racism.
Yeah.
But what does that actually look like, in practice? Can you give us some concrete examples?
Sure. Let's take the criminal justice system, for example. While laws, may be written to be colorblind, the application of those laws often reveals deeply embedded biases. Black individuals are disproportionately stopped, searched, and arrested compared to their white counterparts, even for really minor offenses. And this disparity extends to sentencing too, where Black individuals often receive harsher penalties for the same crimes committed by white individuals.
It's almost I don't know, there's this hidden script that plays out, leading to predictable outcomes based on race.
Yeah.
Rather than actual, guilt or innocence.
That's exactly it. That's the insidious nature of systemic racism. It operates on multiple levels, from implicit biases in policing practices to disparities in access to legal representation, and it creates this vicious cycle where Black individuals are more likely to be entangled in the criminal justice system, which further perpetuates these negative stereotypes and reinforces existing power imbalances.
And these inequalities, extend way beyond just a criminal justice system, don't they? I mean, we see them reflected in things like housing, employment, even healthcare.
Oh, absolutely. Discrimination in housing, for example, that can limit access to, quality education, job opportunities, even like healthcare facilities. Studies show that Black individuals and other minority groups, they're often denied loans or offered less favorable terms compared to white individuals with like similar financial profiles. And, this creates a wealth gap that's like passed down through generations, perpetuating these cycles of disadvantage.
It's like this invisible hand
Yeah, yeah.
holding certain groups back, limiting their opportunities and potential.
And then we can't forget about implicit bias, those unconscious prejudices that we all kind of carry within us, shaped by, our upbringing, our social circles, the media we consume. These biases, they can really influence our perceptions and decision making, even when we think we're being fair, impartial.
It's like, I don't know, like a hidden code embedded in our brains,
Yeah.
influencing our interactions with others without us even like realizing it.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to like be aware of our own biases, to challenge our own assumptions, to actively seek out diverse perspectives. We need to be willing to have these like uncomfortable conversations, to listen to those whose lived experiences are different from our own, and to acknowledge the ways in which we might be complicit, in perpetuating these systems of oppression.
So alongside like these systemic challenges, we also see the rise of more overt forms of racism, like hate speech and hate crimes. It feels like we're taking a step backwards.
Yeah.
With a resurgence of open hostility.
Sadly, you're right. The internet and social media, while they offer platforms for connection and activism, they've also become, breeding grounds for hate speech and extremism. Anonymity empowers people to, just spew vitriol, spread misinformation, and they can do it with like alarming speed and reach. And this creates a like toxic environment, normalizing prejudice and emboldening those with hateful ideologies.
And these words, they have real world consequences, don't they? They incite violence, create a climate of fear for marginalized communities.
Oh, absolutely. Hate speech doesn't, exist in a vacuum. It leads to hate crimes, acts of violence and intimidation, targeting individuals or groups based on their race, religion, ethnicity, or sexual orientation. These acts are, they're meant to terrorize, to send a message that certain people aren't welcome or safe in their own communities.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
To think that in this day and age, people are still being targeted, attacked, simply for who they are.
And it's crucial to remember that racial injustice, it intersects with other global issues, creating these like complex layers of inequality. Take climate change, for example.
Yeah.
Marginalized communities, often communities of color, they're disproportionately impacted by the effects of climate change. From, rising sea levels to extreme weather events, they often live in areas with higher pollution levels too. And they lack access to the resources and infrastructure they need to like adapt or recover from these, climate-related disasters.
It's like they're being hit from all sides,
Yeah.
facing the brunt of a problem they didn't even create.
Exactly. Climate change, it exacerbates existing social and economic inequalities, putting these already vulnerable communities at even greater risk. This interconnectedness highlights the urgent need for like intersectional solutions that address both, racial injustice and climate change at the same time. We can't afford to tackle these issues in isolation.
It's a sobering reminder that the fight for racial justice is this like complex and multifaceted endeavor. We've uncovered so much, from the systemic inequalities in our institutions to the resurgence of, overt racism and the interconnectedness of racial injustice with other global issues. It can feel, overwhelming at times, almost paralyzing. Where do we even begin to address all of this?
Yeah, it's true. The scale and complexity of these issues can feel, super daunting. But we can't just let that paralyze us. Every step, towards justice, no matter how small, it makes a difference.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that, we all have a role to play here in dismantling these systems of oppression. We can't just sit around and wait for, others to fix it. We need to be, active participants in creating a more just and equitable world.
For sure. So let's talk about action. What are some concrete steps we can take as individuals, to contribute to this fight?
Well, I think First and foremost, it starts with education. We need to, educate ourselves about the history of racial injustice, understand how like systemic racism operates, and listen to the lived experiences of those who are, affected by it. I mean, there are tons of resources out there: books, articles, documentaries, even like podcasts. Engaging in conversations like this one, can help us like deepen our understanding and challenge our own assumptions.
Yeah, it's about being willing to like step outside our comfort zones a bit and engage with perspectives that might, challenge our own worldviews. And once we have that knowledge, how do we actually translate it into action?
One powerful way is to become an ally. This means like speaking up against racism and discrimination whenever we encounter it, whether it's, just a casual racist joke or a more like overt act of prejudice. It means like challenging our friends and family when they, express biased views. It means using our voices to amplify the voices of those who are marginalized and, often silence.
It's about not being a bystander.
Right.
Stepping up and saying like, hey, this is not okay.
Yeah.
Even when it's, uncomfortable.
Totally. It's about recognizing that silence is complicity. Every time we choose to stay silent in the face of injustice, we're contributing to the problem. And, allyship, it goes beyond just words. It's about actively supporting organizations that are, working to combat racial injustice, donating our time or resources to causes that align with our values.
Right. So it's about like taking that knowledge and turning it into, tangible action, making choices that reflect our commitment to a more just world. And what about on a larger scale? Like, what are some ways to, influence systemic change?
Well, we can start by, supporting policies that promote racial equity. We can vote for candidates who, prioritize racial justice issues and hold elected officials accountable for their actions. We can advocate for reforms in areas like criminal justice, education, housing, and healthcare, pushing for policies that address systemic disparities and promote, equal opportunities for everyone.
So it's about engaging with like the political process, using our voices and our votes to push for change at all levels. And I imagine supporting businesses and organizations owned by, by people of color is another way to contribute to like economic empowerment and challenge systemic inequalities.
Absolutely. By choosing to, spend our money with businesses that are owned and operated by people of color, we can help to close the racial wealth gap and support communities that have been like historically marginalized.
Yeah, it's like voting with our wallets, right?
Yeah.
Making conscious choices that align with our values and contribute to a more, equitable society.
Exactly. And beyond individual actions, it's crucial to remember the power of collective action. Joining organizations and movements that are dedicated to, racial justice, it can really amplify our impact, allowing us to work together towards, shared goals, whether it's participating in protests, signing petitions, or engaging in community organizing. Collective action has historically been a really powerful force for social change.
Yeah, for sure. It's a reminder that this fight, it's not about individual heroism. It's about working together.
Yeah.
Building coalitions and leveraging our collective power to create a more just and equitable world.
Well said. And as we navigate this complex and challenging journey, it's important to remember that we're not alone. There are like tons of individuals and organizations dedicated to this fight. We can learn from each other, support each other, and draw inspiration from the progress that has been made.
That's a good point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. Imagine a world where everyone has equal opportunities, regardless of their, race or ethnicity. It's a world where systemic barriers are, dismantled, where diversity is celebrated, and where justice and equity prevail. It's a world worth fighting for, and that fight starts with each of us.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration and reflection. Remember, the fight for racial justice is, it's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
And every step we take brings us closer to a more equitable future.
Thanks for listening, and keep diving deep.